let me start by telling you a little bit about Dr. Kanaaneh's book, Chief Complaint, A Country Doctor's Tales of Life in the Galilee, which he is focusing on today. I'll do a quick, just a few remarks about it, and I know he's going to talk a lot more. As you can see, we have some copies on sale, and Dr. Kanaaneh will be pleased to sign them afterwards. And there are many other books also that are being sold by Just World Books. Those of you who are watching virtually can also find the book online at justworldbooks.com. So in this book, author Hatim Kanaaneh explores the changing, precarious, and ever-shrinking world of Palestinians living in Israel. He was his village's first Western-trained physician, so Dr. Kanaaneh has had intimate access to his neighbors' lives, and he chronicles them here in a collection of vignettes based on some true events and that are fictionalized. These compelling short stories reveal the struggles, the triumphs, the memories, and the hopes of the indigenous Palestinian community living in a state that does not acknowledge their past or support their future. Each story is titled Chief Complaint by the protagonist, the principal reason that the patient sought medical attention at Dr. Kanaaneh's clinic. He narrates their troubles and their pain, both psychological and physical, as well as the joys that punctuate life for the Palestinians in the Galilee. Although they are about life in the Galilee, they cover many universal themes of human and social existence, such as mourning the loss of a loved one, inability to conceive children, old age and its difficulties, negotiating political systems and social classes, or nostalgia for one's past, just to name a few. As I read these vignettes, it occurred to me that as a doctor, Dr. Kanaaneh, his foundational focus on the human body as a jumping point reinforces the corporeal presence of Palestinians in historic Palestine. And his narration of this bodily presence on this land interrogates the whole concept of the present absentee, the term that the State of Israel used on the Palestinians who remained in Israel after the Nakba in 1948. So in the end, this collection poignantly conveys their community's most chief of all complaints, which is the difficult and conflict-filled relationship with the State of Israel. On behalf of everyone at the Jerusalem Fund, welcome to Dr. Hatim Kanaaneh. He is a Harvard-trained physician, a writer, a storyteller, and a tireless grassroots advocate for Palestinians in the Galilee and everywhere. He's a retired Palestinian doctor who has served in various capacities in the Galilee, including as a doctor in his home village of Arabi. He's well known as a Palestinian public health physician who earlier described the health deprivations faced by Israel's numerous ethnic Palestinian citizens in his nonfiction work called A Doctor in Galilee. He's also the founder of the Galilee Society, which is an NGO working for equitable health, environmental, and socioeconomic conditions for Palestinian Arabs living in Israel. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kanaaneh.
Thank you, Zena, so much. What I can tell from the introduction you made is that you did read the book, which is, so thank you so much. And I'm so happy to see so many good friends from the good old days and the new friends here. So welcome, everybody. I am going to be telling you a little bit about the background to writing this book, and then read you from one story in the book that I selected for today. I suppose in selecting the stories, I tried to figure out who's going to be there and to do something for them. And I expected that Saeed Abu Naj would be here, and he's from Safuri. So the story today is about somebody from Safuri. And the last time I read, it was about somebody from Lubi, and we have somebody from Lubi here. These are Palestinian villages from Galilee that have been totally erased off the face of the earth and replaced by either a different Jewish community or a forest. At any rate, we'll get to that maybe during the question and answer period. Now, again, I want to thank Zaina for her welcome and to say that this place, when I walked in, familiar. I've been here some 25 years ago when I spoke about the Galilee Society. I was at the time the director of the organization, which still exists. And I'm so proud that I finished working with the Galilee Society and it continued on without me. And that's something that I'm very proud of. And I am also very happy to mention the Galilee Society because there are so many people here who are, or that I know through my work with the Galilee Society. There's Tom and Pat New, and Pat was one of the good people that really, on volunteer basis, when she was working with the Save the Children, the United States, Save the Children USA, she was in their office in Jerusalem, and she just saw that this organization has some future. And she put so much effort into that, into our process of writing project and so on, helping us. And I remember when she was pregnant to Chris, and I was so worried that she's going to go in labor while we are working on that project. And so I'm so happy to see Tom and Pat here. And of course, through Pat, I got to know Chris Mansour, who is here also. He was an intern with us for 6 months or so. And there is Ibtisam Ibrahim over here, who worked as my secretary for a while before she became Dr. Ibtisam Ibrahim. And I'm very happy to see her here. So welcome all of you. And if I forgot to mention somebody here that I know from before, please forgive me. Okay, we'll go on to today's assignment. Let me say, before the Galilee Society, which was really one of the first NGOs in the Palestinian community within Israel, before that, and even before that, I finished high school in Nazareth. I taught school for 2 years, and then I came to the United States to study medicine. And I did spend the 1960s in the USA, and in 1970 I returned to my home village with my Hawaiian wife and with degrees in medicine and public health. And commenced to change the world, or so I thought. And pretty quick, I had 2 full-time jobs, essentially. Daytime in the morning, I went to an office job in the Ministry of Health. I was the medical officer in charge of the preventive services in the Western Galilee, and then eventually the entire Galilee, where half the population are Palestinian and the other half are Jewish, and I was in charge of both sides. But quickly I could see that much as hard as I tried, like 80% of my time was spent on the Jewish half of my population. And at the same time that the health conditions of the Arab half of my population were much worse and just didn't fit together. And I tried to raise, some questions, some issues about that with my superiors in the health ministry, but nobody was really interested in doing much about it. And so I went ahead and recruited 3 other physicians, and we established something a charitable organization that was called the Galilee Society for Health Research and Services. And I ran that show essentially from 1980 to 1995, and left it to the new generation, and still running strong. A little bit different focus today than before, but still dealing with issues of the Palestinian community in Israel, health issues of the Palestinian community in Israel. Okay. So in about 2005, I retired completely from medical practice. I didn't mention that that was one job at the health ministry. The other job was I came home, and in 1970 there was no other doctor in the village. Not only that, but no other doctor within miles. I had a total of close to 50,000 people that depended on me as their sole healthcare provider. And so there wasn't a night that that somebody didn't knock at my door 4, 5, dozen times a night. And when I finished working as a general practitioner and turned over my clinic to my nephew, and there were lots of new doctors, and this would sound a little strange probably, but most of them are graduates of the Soviet Union, because the Communist Party gave full scholarships to students from our communities, and the expense and the entrance requirements for university in Israel were very hard for our students to qualify, and so lots of them did wind up going through the Communist Party to the Soviet Union and come back as professionals, lawyers, engineers, and doctors mainly. So, okay, this is the background to the community. And for those, I think most of you probably are familiar with the situation of the Palestinian minority in Israel in terms of the historical background. Let me just very briefly summarize that in 1948, about 85% of what was to become Israel, the population, 85% of the Palestinian population of what was to become Israel crossed the borders, were driven out from their homes to become refugees in the neighboring countries, especially in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And the remaining 15%, that's us. A good friend of mine, Hatim Kanaaneh, says that a vicious border crossed us. We didn't cross a border, but a border crossed us, and we found ourselves on the wrong side of the border. And after that, we lost the majority of our land through confiscation by our state. The Jewish majority of the state of Israel proceeded to define us out of the common good of the country and out of the security concerns of the country, and we became pretty much an enemy population. Our communities were, and this is something that lots of people don't realize, the population centers in Israel are almost completely segregated, Jewish and Arab. So there is really very little intermixing, except at the site of work. The Palestinians providing really the muscle power for most of the construction work in the Jewish cities, and lots of also the agricultural work in the Jewish collective farms. At any rate, our communities became essentially, our villages became bedroom communities to which laborers returned to sleep and for weekends. Okay, so here I am trying to do the best I can for my community, and I served as much as I could as a doctor. When there were lots of new doctors, my contribution wasn't all that essential anymore, and I felt a bit redundant. So I put more and more effort in the advocacy work that we were doing at the Galilee Society, and eventually I also left that. And so I was thinking, what could I still do to serve my community? It occurred to me that at the end, it's really you who decide my future, the future of my children back as a Palestinian community in Israel. It's the American and perhaps the European general public who, through their election and democracy processes and so on, end up deciding what happens in the Middle East. And it occurred to me that I would like to let people, especially in America, but in Europe as well, to let people know about our existence. The state of Israel tried to keep us as a secret, pretty much. Didn't acknowledge our presence, at any rate. So I took on this assignment of trying to introduce my community to the English readership, to the American public especially. I wrote a book of memoirs, and it was published in London, and it got very good reviews, except that got good reviews from Palestinians and the converted, the sympathizers of the Palestinians. And so I didn't really have an impact as much as I could tell. So the next idea was, okay, if that is so, what do Americans read? What do the general public read? And I hit on the idea that perhaps if I wrote fiction, that would be a better way of presenting my issues to the American public. And so I went to the Graduate Center at the City University of New York, where there is something called the Writers Institute, and I did a year in fiction writing. And when I finished, I started looking at trying to write fiction in the American style. Well, but that's not how people tell stories back home. You know, that what we were taught, I found it very limiting. And I started thinking, oh, with that kind of, you know, you're supposed to stick to the outline of your story, not to stray off the central theme, and so on and so forth. Where would that leave 1,000 Nights? I mean, 1,001 Nights, the Arabian Nights. No, it just doesn't work. Or Ghassan Kanafani, or Emil Habibi. And I thought, okay, at least I know what rules I am breaking when I am breaking those rules. So I started writing in my own traditional Arabic style of writing, where you go off on tangentials and you don't really stick with a line of a story and so on. At any rate, I wrote a collection of short stories about the people in my village. Hopefully nobody will recognize himself in these stories, but I suppose some will do that. At any rate, I thought we don't have much time left, but I'll tell you the story that I selected to read pieces from, and I'll do as little reading as I can because we want to leave some time for question and answer. I think I should explain that the name of the collection, Chief Complaint, was inspired by a remark from a friend of mine who teaches fiction writing at NYU. His name is Chuck Wachtel, and Professor Chuck Wachtel paid me a very, very unusual compliment. He said, you know, Hatim, when I read your stuff on your blog, I am reminded of Primo Levi. And I said, who's Primo Levi? You know, I'm not that well informed on literary issues. And so he said, well, go ahead and read the periodic table. And when I read it, I was very impressed. And if a chemist can use the tool of the periodic table to narrate about his issues and about his people, I, as a doctor, could use the Chief Complaint. You see, on the traditional, I don't know whether it's still used today or not, but the traditional chart of the doctor, each patient chart has at the very top, the first line says Chief Complaint. What brings the patient to the doctor? What is why he came to see me? And the doctors usually, when they interview with a patient, when you do a full, interview or examination, you go through the body systems. You start with the head, and you go down to the neck, the chest, the abdomen, the legs, and the back of the legs, and the feet. And so that's how I ordered my stories, according to what complaint the patients came with. And this is toward the end, and it is abdominal swelling or swollen abdomen. Swollen abdomen. And it starts with, like all the stories, they start with an epigram. We did not weep when we were leaving, for we had neither time nor tears, and there was no farewell. We did not know at the moment of parting that it was a parting. So where would our weeping have come from? This is from Mahmoud Darwish, Taha Muhammad Ali, who is a refugee from Safuri and lived for a couple of years in Syria in the Yarmouk camp, and then returned to and was a refugee in Nazareth for the rest of his life. And I came to know him well, and he passed away about 2 years or 3 years ago. At any rate, Taha Muhammad Ali is one of my favorite poets, Palestinian poets. Okay, I'll try and read a little bit from the beginning of the story. When I read this poem, when I first read it, the image of Ghaida, my blonde, overweight patient whose life I once successfully saved and whose good name I tried to protect. Her image swirls in my head. In 1948, the scared people of Safuri streamed through Arabi's olive groves northward to their bleak new reality in Lebanon's refugee camps. Young, newlywed Ghaida, her old, bent-over mother, her jealously observant father, and her scrawny husband with a permanent bemused look on his face took refuge in Arabi. A freak accident of fate brought this family to the home of Summer in our neighborhood. Summer, the ill-reputed, doe-eyed village hostess of single men and influential government officials. The foursome from Safuri settled in the extra room the beautiful Madame had. They had been looking for Ghaida's sister, lost in the mayhem of the mass flight. Someone with a sick sense of humor directed them to Summer, and the two women of the same age and with like gaiety clicked. Ghaida's husband found employment in as another farmhand at one of the better landed families in Arabi. This was immediately after the Nakba, before we were brought into the fold of full progress. The village lifestyle had not yet been affected by the Israeli civilizing influence that was to follow shortly and to modernize us out of our traditional ways and incidentally away from our ancestral land. The man essentially worked as an old-fashioned plowman and brought home enough payment in wheat and olive oil to sustain his naturally jovial wife, their fast-growing brood of children, and the pair of gloomy, quickly wasting old parents. And I go on to tell about the two parents, the old man who dabbled in writing amulets and doing that kind of magic cures for people, and the old lady who, because her daughter was lost and she couldn't find her, she was reputed to have taken an oath never to have sex or bathe again till she finds her daughter. And I go on a tangential here and I talk about that oath that she took. Taking a bath and having sex are connected in traditional cultures in these parts, in Galilee. Once you made love, you have to cleanse yourself of al-hadath al-akbar, literally Arabic for the big event, by bathing before you could stand before God in prayer again. With the paucity of water, it evolved that married couples would bathe only when they had sex. When I first returned to Galilee with my wife, Arabi had not been connected to the electricity grid yet. My brother Ahmed had one of the few electric generators in the village, and hence had a year-round supply of hot water. My wife and I lived in the upgraded camel stalls that constituted the ground level of my sister's two-story house, adjacent to my brother Ahmed's house. The shortest way between the two houses was to climb a ladder to the roof and go down the stairs on the other side. So, to take a shower, We would parade across the rooftop daily with our telltale towels, bar of soap, and fresh change of clothing, in full view of the whole Kanaaneh neighborhood. Rapidly, we acquired the reputation of being sex maniacs, especially in the hot and dusty summer, when we would often make the trans-roof journey to my brother's shower room twice a day. This all was still bearable. What went beyond tolerance was when I would be away for a day or two, an event that would be public knowledge in the village because I was the only doctor around. And Didi would still be seen crossing that that well-watched roof to take a shower. Who was the creep that was visiting her? Okay. And then I tell the story about this lady who comes to me 2 years after the death of her husband, and she has a big belly. And the rumor around is that she's pregnant. And that's a really, really serious affair. And I try and examine her, and I don't hear any fetal heartbeats, meaning I don't think she's pregnant, but convince other people that she's not pregnant. I then try and send her to a good surgeon, because I made the snap judgment that this must be an ovarian cyst that grows so big. So I send her to Nazareth to Dr. Hans Bernath, who was my good friend, and Dr. Hans Bernath removed the growth, and it is benign and everything is all right. But the rumor that she was pregnant goes on. And then I go on and tell about all the actual pregnancies out of wedlock that I handled and how I used to handle them. And the credit I acquired from doing that, not only at the intimate level of the families whose honor I would save, but also the fact that I used to say that, a young woman gets pregnant, we manage to get her married to whoever the father of the baby is, and then she, 3 months or 4 months after they are married, she has a baby. And I would make charts to show that the baby was premature, and I got to salvage the life of babies after 3 months of pregnancy. And that was really very, very, good credit for me. And so I mentioned that a little bit here. And we go on to talk about how the rumor mills in the village go on from one diwan to the other, from one gathering to the next, and so on. And I'll just read the very last short paragraph, and then we'll open it for a question and answer. She's telling me this is after she came back from the hospital, and the rumor persists that she was pregnant. All I can do is to ask God to forgive them. Ghaida decried her luck. But I'm a refugee, easy prey for their wild rumors. Who is there to defend my honor? اتشتتنا يا ويلي. اتشتتنا يا ويلي. Like a brood of wild baby cats, each went in a different direction. Days were when the men of my clan in Safori would silence such rumors at the source. No one would dare put a blemish on my name and honor. We have indeed been dispersed, and the rumor seems to have caught on, and I couldn't do too much about it. So that's the end of that story. Okay? And I'm now open to questions, and I'll try to answer them.
Just talk briefly about the political status of the people in your area, whether they could vote and those types of issues, briefly.
Okay, well, I knew that this kind of question will come up, of course, because we had elections 2 days ago. And as a matter of fact, I did write something about elections that appeared on the website that's called The Hell. Yeah. And everybody knows who Azmi Bishara is, right? Yeah, he's a well-known thinker, let's say, and a leader, political leader of a party in Israel, one of the Palestinian or one of the Arab parties in Israel. He has a famous statement about this claim to democracy for the Arab minority. And his simple statement is, give me back all the land you took and take the vote away. I don't mind. I mean, I'm willing to trade back what you gave me to what you took from me. The issue of voting, I think Netanyahu summed it for me better than I can ever sum it. Okay? When the voting process was about more than halfway through, he made a statement and sent actually a text message asking everybody in his party and on the right in Israel to come out and vote because the Arabs are voting in droves. Okay? Now that, to me, really crystallizes and encapsulates the real contradiction that exists in the concept of Israel as a democratic and Jewish state. Okay? Because the democratic process of voting is encroaching on the Jewish nature of the state. So thinks the prime minister, and he calls on everybody to stop that. So there is a basic contradiction, and the reason the elections were held now, this is not the time for elections. The elections were held early because Netanyahu wanted to pass a law that would state the fact, I mean, legally, I don't know how to frame it, but he wanted to pass a law that would state that the Jewish nature of Israel trumps the democratic part of its existence. He wanted that stated legally. The fact is that there's nothing new about that. That's what has been happening all along since 1948. What has been lacking is to have it black and white as an official policy. But in practice, it has been always, since 1948, it has always been the Jewish nature of the state trumps the democratic claim for us. So it has been a democracy for the Jewish citizens of Israel, not for me. Okay. And that has nothing to do with my story, except
After your medical training at Harvard, you went back to your village in the Galilee. What about your equipment? Where did you get your supplies and set up your office? And you must have had some staff. And how did you get the people to come to you as patients? And I can't believe they had money. So was it a barter system to pay you?
Okay. I guess I could speak from now till tomorrow morning about that, but let me try and summarize for you. First of all, my worry was not about getting patients to come to me. My worry was about how to stop them from coming to me, because there was no alternative, essentially. I was the first physician in the area. And as part of stopping people from coming 24 hours a day, I had to charge something. And all of my practice, throughout all of my practice, I never charged anybody more than $10 per, not visit, but per illness, regardless how many times they came back. But you see, before 48, I'm going back, I went back in 1970, but we're still with the mentality of the old farming mentality, where cash really didn't play a role. It was more of a subsistence bartering kind of system. And so cash was very hard to come by. And so I used to use that, the scarcity of money, and those $10, I used to use that for lots of tricky ways. For example, one of the major problems was the summer diarrhea and vomiting among children especially. And a child would come that I knew I couldn't handle. I want that baby to be in the hospital. And from experience, I would send the baby to the hospital, and very often the family would do the calculations and find that they will take the risk and not go to the hospital. And so to make sure that they will go to the hospital, I would charge them $20 and say, bring me back, here's the letter to the hospital, bring me back the answer and I'll return the $20. And that worked, magic. Once in a while I had to get in my car and take the baby myself against the will of almost against the will of the parents sometimes. But that was one of the tricks I used. We didn't have electricity. When people started thinking about bringing electricity to the village, I was on the electricity committee of the village. So anybody who brought a receipt that he paid his fees for the electricity committee for 3 months could get treated free of charge. And that also worked for quite a while. And people started appearing with receipts for water and receipts for whatever. And so I lost track even of the question, but yeah, equipment, yes, yeah, okay. Yes, okay. I really have the right to brag. I had my stethoscope. And that's all. That was all. I had no equipment. A friend of mine who's till today, one of my best friends, he's a biochemist, and he headed the laboratory in the closest hospital to us. And so when I really wanted to know about something, I would order a urine analysis and a blood count through my friend, and he would sneak it into the hospital laboratory and bring me back under somebody else's name or something, and bring me back the result. And that, I did that maybe once every month, every 2 months. I could do my own urine analysis and sometimes blood count, but nothing beyond that. I had to rely on my stethoscope, on my senses. And you know, what they taught us is correct, that medicine is more than 50% art. And it is less science than it is art. If you listen to the patient or to the mother of the baby, you really can make a pretty good diagnosis of what's happening. So I did fairly well. When I just couldn't figure it out, I would call Dr. Hans Bernath, who he was a very close friend. He was a Swiss physician who headed the Nazareth Hospital, and he was excellent plumber for the hospital, an excellent carpenter, and a great surgeon, and a great everything. And he was a fantastic gentleman, and we were on very good terms. I would call him, or I'll send the patient to him, and I'd say, listen, this family cannot afford them to pay or whatever, and he will handle it as best as he can. And those are the cases that I just couldn't figure out or couldn't handle myself. I used to rely on the help of the Nazareth Hospital.
Can you wait just a moment to get the mic?
Would that be a Jewish doctor? What would be the relationship then between professionals of the two sides?
Okay. Dr. Hans Bernath was he Protestant or Catholic? Catholic, I think. Whatever. Yeah, but he came in the early 1950s on a mission with the Red Cross, and he stuck around in Nazareth and became the head of the Nazareth Hospital, which was a missionary hospital, Scottish missionary hospital. In Nazareth there were, and still are, 3 different missionary hospitals: Scottish, French, and Italian. And they were established originally as facilities for the pilgrims to come and accommodations for the pilgrims, and at the same time would do favors to the population of treating them and so on. And here's the time for a good joke. Supposedly there used to be the missionaries would come, and there would be a doctor with them, and there would be people who came to the doctor have to wait their turn, and the missionaries would start talking to them and telling them about Christianity, and so the missionary is saying about the miracles that Jesus Christ did, and he made the water into wine, and he made the dead person get up and walk, and so on. And all the group sitting around would say, Salatu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. God bless the Prophet Muhammad. He must be great, this Isa. So, it is very difficult really to convert people just based on little favors, yeah? That's, as you know, there is the term rice Christianity, and where, trying to convert people by offering them rice or something. This is in the Far East, yeah? But at any rate, Okay.
Hi, Doctor. I hate to keep coming back to politics, but have a comment and a question. The comment is, unlike Fatah and Hamas, 4 Arab parties have worked together and formed the 3rd largest political organization in the country. One, are there Palestinian doctors playing a key role in any of those 4 parties? And 2, do you acknowledge that that is some real power?
Are any Palestinian doctors playing? Yeah. Okay, let me just first make a statement about myself. I never played politics. I never ran for any office. I never had the time for that. Okay? I have a colleague, and we know each other fairly well, Dr. Ahmed Tibi, who has been in the forefront of Israeli Arab politics all those years, and he speaks Hebrew better than Arabic, I think, and is very fluent and very knowledgeable in terms of the lifestyle of the Jewish community, and he's very popular with TV programs in Israel, in the Jewish TV, Hebrew TV programs in Israel. So he is the lead personality in the group now. There was also Dr. Let's see, from Al-Fahim, Afu Ghbariyi. Afu Ghbariyi is a communist trained communist activist person who ran in the previous Knesset elections and won and was a member of the Knesset for 4 years, or they didn't serve 4 years, I think close to 3 years at any rate. So there are some medical personalities in politics. I'm not one of them, as I said. The other part of your question is about the unity of the 4 different Arab parties in Israel. This was really forced on them. Usually, every elections, most of the speeches you hear from the Arab parties within Israel is one against the other. It's arguing between themselves. The Islamic Party against the communists who are infidels, and the communists against the Islamists who are not progressive, and the nationalists against the non-nationalists, and so on and so forth. So there is always internal infighting. And then Lieberman, Avigdor Lieberman, he's there. Well, I don't need to say anything. Decided to pass a law because he did his calculations. The law says that, said at the time, that if you don't get any party that doesn't get 2% of the total calls, or the total votes, does not figure at all. It loses its membership in the parliament. So he calculated that all those pesky Arab parties have about 3%, so let's raise it to 3.25%, okay? And that's what happened. All the Arab parties knew that they will not pass that line, that 3.25% of the votes, and of the total votes. And so there was a committee, that self-appointed committee, that went and tried to get all the 4 parties together, and they succeeded in doing so, okay? Because everybody realized they're going all to lose if they don't unite. Now, the beautiful part which didn't happen, somebody did the calculation that if all the Arab voters in Israel came out and voted, if 80% of them came out and voted, and they all voted for this united party, Avigdor Lieberman will not reach 3.25 because it is a percentage, it is a ratio. Yeah, that would have been poetic justice, as I say, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Chris.
Dr. Hatim, those great stories. When I was with you, had the honor to work with you in the Galilee, we worked on sewage systems for the.
I don't hear you well.
I'm sorry. How's that? Better? Better? Okay,
yes.
Good. We were doing projects around the sewer and water systems for the various communities in the Galilee, the Arab communities. I had the opportunity to, well, I don't know how opportunity it was, but Netanyahu was on the NPR radio this morning and trying to contradict the fact that, you know, he kept on saying, I am the prime minister of all Israel, including the Arabs. And as an example, he said, well, I've invested billions and billions of dollars in the Arab communities in the Galilee and other places around Israel. Have you seen any of those billions of dollars in your communities, or what's going on with that?
Okay. Let me answer not directly. Somebody today, I heard somebody on the Real News Network. Shir Hever is his name. He's an Israeli correspondent for the Real News Network. And he was being interviewed, and he said, I'm really reassured about the future of the Palestinian state. And they said, why? And he said, you know, Netanyahu never told a truth. And he said there will be no Palestinian state. Therefore, I am reassured. So that gives you my answer. Yeah? You remember how hard we worked, and Pat remembers, she helped us out with that. How much time do we have? Do we have another hour? I'll try. Yeah. Okay. I really will try to simplify that. Chris knows this very well because we worked on it together, and Pat also worked with us on this. In the 1970s, when I started working, and by actually till the 1980, when the Galilee Society was established, one of our major projects, major issues, was the issue of sewage disposal. Okay, just for very simple kind of explanation. In the old days, farmers all over the third world countries had depended on rainwater, essentially, okay? In our area, there aren't that many rivers. There's the Jordan, and then they sucked it dry and to take it to the Negev, and they told us that is for agricultural projects in the Negev. Actually, it was for the nuclear operation in Dimona. So, you used water very sparingly, and you reused it. It was a precious commodity. I don't know, you washed your vegetables and then you wiped the floor, and then whatever was left, you watered the lemon tree in the yard, okay? So, I mean, there was no excess water anywhere. Then people got together in Arabi, for example, and in most of the Arabic villages in the 1960s, immediately after the military government was dissolved in our area. And people started organizing in committees that would drill for water and build a network of water for each community. So you had running water into the homes. Nobody bothered to ask, what do you do with the water after you use it? People learned to waste water, and people had showers and bathrooms, and pretty soon every Palestinian community that I visited, and I was in charge of lots of those communities in terms of the health and the preventive services for it, every village had sewage water, open sewage water running in the streets. And the kids going to school would step in it and so that was the background to what I said about diarrhea and vomiting diseases. That's how you catch it. So when I started with the Galilee Society, we started worrying about this. We have to find a way of getting everybody to build a sewage collection system to take it out of the community and then treat it or whatever, or dispose of it one way or the other. And just couldn't understand. I swear to you, it took me several years before I understood what was happening. How come every Jewish community had sewage disposal system, a functioning sewage some of them just took it out of the village and threw it in the valley, the open sewage, but at least you took it out of the community. Every Jewish community had a sewage disposal system. Every Arabic community didn't have a sewage. It was black and white, 100%. Just no way that could be incidental. That couldn't be by chance. There must be a system to it. And we started visiting the various local authorities. Why don't you have a sewage system? And they would say, oh, we applied and we sent a plan and we did this and we did that. And we started looking in depth at it. And I think Chris would remember this one. And for a community, okay, just follow with me the logic for a minute. For a community to have, or let's step back even, Jewish communities are all new communities. They all are planned communities. Before the first residential population comes and uses the house has electricity and has telephone line and it has water, running water, and it has sewage disposal. It is all part of the infrastructure before people move into the settlement, okay? And all Jewish communities are new Jewish communities. The very, very few that were started before 48. The majority came after 48. There were some before 48, but they also were planned and new communities. So you had that taken care of by the state without anybody doing anything about it. Now, Arab communities, my village, Arabi, the other day my neighbor found a stone and it is like 3,000 years and it has the image of Ashtar, the Canaanite goddess of fertility. So we have been around for like 3,000-4,000 years at least, and you come and you want to graft on that a sewage system. That's not easy. So you need a plan, okay? I'm sorry I'm taking too long, but I'll finish in 5 minutes. You need a plan. The plan has to be drawn by an engineering firm. The engineering firm, to draw a plan, we asked around and we asked for prices and so on. For an average Palestinian village in the Galilee, you needed $20,000 to draw a plan for sewage disposal, for a sewage network. $20,000, that's a lot of money for a village in Israel, for a Palestinian village in Israel. You have to collect the money from the population, because the state will not, I mean, you apply to the state, no way, no, nobody's is going to give you $20,000. So, okay, well, we will raise the money from our population. Okay, to raise the money from the population, the law says that you have to assess a tax proportionately, and you have to do it based on a plan, which will cost $20,000. And so how do you go about doing that? And so with the advice of Tom and Pat New, and Chris worked on that, we put together a plan for a revolving fund that we gave the local authority $20,000. You go and commission a plan. You assess, the plan is passed, you assess your residents some tax based on that, you collect the money, give it back to us, we give it to somebody else. So revolving loan, and that was funded by the Welfare Association. At the time it was based in Geneva, a Palestinian NGO based in Geneva. And we helped like 35 different communities do that. Okay, that's the end of my story.